Hey everybody, it's Mr. Z again. I am about to show you how to work with a watercolor bear. I thought that perhaps you would like to watch me work here and see what you can do and see what you can learn. Some of these lessons you have had before. I hope you can still hear me. As you can see, we have a beautiful bear here, and I've always taught the children to measure. Let's see how long that bear's head is from the tip of his nose to the top of his hump is large. Let's put that next to his body. Does anybody see something? I bet you're seeing that they're about the same size. So I'm going to use this red pencil to kind of roughly establish about the size of that head up to the hump. I think you can see the red. And then I'm going to take that measurement and put it next to him from below the hump to where his rear end would be. There we go. That would mean very roughly that would be where the bear's rear end is, okay? Now, we have a hump here. It comes down. It goes into a nose. And it comes back, okay? I'm just very, 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 very. I wonder how far back that ear is from that nose. Okay, that far, and it's also from the top of the ear to the back of the hump. So, if I can measure roughly where the ear would be, it should be the same distance to the back of the hump. That tended to be very good. It seems to me that he has a little bit of a mouth here. We're very rough. This seems to come down and curve back. And these tend to head down. As you can see, I'm drawing what I'm looking at. That, class, is the very, very, very rough estimate of what we're going to do with our beautiful Kodiak bear here. Okay, so if you can see that in red, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go back over the animal and I'm going to add the details as and I'm doing that with a black pen if you're content with what you've seen so far. I'm adding a few details. It looks to me like the eye comes in like that. And now we're starting to see some nice fuzz. So we can work on the fuzz. And obviously the main measurement of this entire picture was that from the nose to the top of the hump was the same distance to the rear end of this fishing critter, right? So very, very roughly, class, that is the animal. And now I'm going to work with a little bit of the water rushing past him. I think you can see that. And very, very, very roughly, I've established the animal. I think the rest of the animal can be done with watercolor. What I have here is a little bit of water. I have some watercolor paints. I hope you have some at home. They're very, very inexpensive. Most kids have some. Here are a few different brushes. I have a bigger brush for washes and a couple of smaller brushes. But I tend to work very, very loose and very, very free. If you take a look at the main color of this critter, you might say, well, Mr. Z, that critter is orange. So why don't we establish the darkest orange with our orange, and then we'll smear some water around it and see if we can soften it. Okay, so I'm going to mix up a little bit of orange and red. And of course, if the animal isn't really orange and red, that's okay. I tend to want to just make the animal have personality. And I'm mixing a beautiful reddish orange, and I'm going to make this rather rich. And I think that you guys can see that the strongest reds seem to be here. So I'm going to put those in first. He tends to have a little red down here. Maybe some pure red would be nice. He has a different color over there. It even looks like he has the slightest bit of yellow in here. Why don't I see if I can put a little bit of yellow next to that red? It kind of made a nice orange. Now, what I'm going to do next, class, is I'm going to soften these colors by simply adding some water to them. as you can see, they will kind of do the work for you for this lighter head. Now, if I tended to want to add some more darks, I can always go back and add the darks later. I really want to remember to leave the white of the paper showing. So what I'm going to do next is try that same technique with some of the shadows, like for instance behind his beautiful arm. He seems to have some dark areas down here. These are very dark. The next thing I'm going to do again is I'm going to add some water, and I'm going to soften this and see if we can get what we need with our beautiful Kodiak bear. Now, you guys might say, well, Mr. Z, you don't have color there. You don't have color there. Well, guess what? I don't want color there. I want the white areas to show. I want them to be the brightest part of the picture. Now, the animal has some darks. The color across the color wheel from red is green, across from orange is blue, and since we have some oranges, why don't we use blue for some of his shadows? So I'm just going to add a few more oranges here just to let everybody know that we have some oranges. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix up a nice purplish blue for some of my dark areas. I'm not sure I want to overwhelm the color of the water. Now, this should be just fine. We need some darks in here. I'm going to add them right now. You might say that looks a little extreme. Well, then I'll balance it. Maybe I'll put some of that purple in the ear. And maybe I will put a little bit of purple back here. And maybe he seemed to have a little bit of a purple marking here. And I'm seeing a few more here. So that is very, very simple. It looks great. If you have added too much purple, like I did, stick your brush in the water, squish out every drop of water, and then kind of use your brush kind of like a sponge to pick it up. Okay, very good. Now we seem to have some water. I think everybody can see that the turquoise of the water is gorgeous. I'm going to use that same flow for this next part. I'm going to mix up a lovely blue-green and see what I can do with that. Remembering that we always want to have the white showing, guys and gals, you lovely art students. So here we have, there's some white. I'm going to leave that white, the bubbling around him. And you tend to have this beautiful flow. So I'm going to add that flow. Nice. So it's got a nice flow for the animal. It seems to me that I can add a little bit of water here for flowage, a little bit of movement. And why don't we try to put a little bit of color in the wetness so that it tends to look like it moves. This area is rather white here in this area, so I'm just going to soften it a little bit. Now, let's take a look at what we have here. We have an animal. He seems to be in the water, and now we need to distinguish between the water and the animal. Do you notice how dark the area is? So we can mix up an exceptionally dark to put back there. Okay, class? Let's do that. I'm going to make a nice green. I'm going to add some black. And I really, 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 really want to make sure that the white areas stand out. And the way that I make the white areas stand out is I get the darks very, very dark. But you'll also notice that I'm leaving a little bit of white on the edge. That's for contrast. We want to have contrast between the water and the bear. I don't want to get that too close to his nose. But I'm going to let, so we can still see his nose. Now I have something that's suggesting a dark color for the animal. I am going to add a bit more, and then I'm going to use that same technique that I like so much, adding some water to soften it. But always remember to leave the white showing. And guess what? Now that I have this green on my brush, I'm going to add a little bit there to balance the color. Just to balance the color. I like it. Maybe a finger wouldn't hurt. That's not bad. Okay, guys, now why don't I go back to work on this beautiful background? And those are kind of trees, I think. So what I'm going to do is go back and add maybe some purples and blues. Now you might say, well, Mr. Z, why are you adding blue? Well, there's blue in the water, guys, so we want to balance what we have. There's blue in the water. And since I have that nice purple in the background, why wouldn't I use a little bit of that purple in the water for balance? Oh, that's it. That's it. And if it's too rough, soften it with a little bit of fresh water. Now, the tendency that kids have is to just keep working, okay? They have a tendency to keep working. Guess what? We have white areas showing here. We have a balance of color. Perhaps we haven't used any red in the background, so why not take a little bit of this red here and put a little bit in? Maybe a little bit in the water. You might say, well, Mr. Z, you know, there's no red in that water. No, but this is a composition. My professor taught me at a certain time, stop looking at what you're looking at and decide what's best for the picture. Sometimes we need a little color, I would say, to make it sing. And so I'm going to just put the littlest bit of yellow here and there so that I can give it a little bit more of a pop. And you'll notice that. You get a little bit of a pop with the color. And since I'm popping yellow, why don't I put a little bit in the water? Why don't I put a little bit in the sky? Why don't I take an even darker color and maybe even this purple here, and maybe I can maybe suggest a pine tree or something behind it. I like it. There's no fish in his mouth, but if you can think, oh, and now the last thing I noticed is that his muzzle's a little darker. So I'm going to see if I can darken. I might have to have a little more color here to darken his muzzle a tiny, tiny little bit. I'm looking at what I'm seeing, class, but I'm also deciding what's best for the picture. Now, I hope you guys had luck. You could easily have taped this down too so it doesn't buckle. This is suitable for framing. I hope that you have luck with your own picture. Perhaps you can find one on your Chromebook and get a thicker piece of paper that'll absorb some of the water. Take a nice pencil drawing first, do your measurement, add some black marker to establish your figure, and then when everything's done, you might have this, which is a Kodiak Bear watercolor showing the correct balance of color, the correct use of white, and the correct use of dark. This is Mr. Z. Here I am again. Signing off. Hope you enjoyed it. Stay safe.